Enjoy your meeting.
Increase revenue, profit, and competitiveness.
Just a reminder, today's meeting is being recorded.
Okay. So what measurable initiatives can HR drive? Because most of the time, if you're in HR, you're saying, well, what do I have to do with revenue? How can I impact profit or competitiveness? Those are not the traditional HR metrics that you see every day and not your traditional focus. In fact, revenue, that's sales. Profit, well, that's finance, and they work with others to make sure the profit's there. Competitiveness, well, that's probably marketing and sales together. In reality, it's everybody in the company. The challenge is, the gap is, most of the time, employees throughout the company do not realize how they're impacting revenue, profit, and competitiveness. So what does traditional HR do? You can see this list, which is what everyone on the phone or on the webinar is looking at and are able to focus on within their areas. So nothing here is new. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. But notice, none of this by itself is what is called 3 to 5 year strategic planning, unless you make it so, and that's your opportunity. So the question is traditional HR strategic? And from a CEO standpoint, in most cases, the answer is no, which is one reason you have a hard time getting at the strategic table. They don't see your direct contribution and value to revenue, profit, and competitiveness with measurable business strategic initiatives. So most of the time, when you look at traditional HR functions, they're focused on the current year. By the way, that's true of finance and other functions. So what is the current year? The current year is focusing on all the key objectives that you have tied into your performance evaluations. And in HR, very often, many fires come up, many issues come up, so sometimes you're in a reactive mode in that process. Therefore, the question is HR strategic? You can define strategic in two ways. It is strategically important as a function, but when I define and when CEOs define strategic, they're normally thinking in terms of 3 to 5 years or longer. Many businesses, 25 years, in China, 100 years. So most people in HR are not thinking in those time horizons, how they're moving the needle year to year. So secondly, they're administrative and risk avoidant. And when you look at most of the activities, it's highly supportive. You're following the best practices and you're trying to avoid risk to the company. You're trying to help the company be successful. The same is true in most other functions, whether it's IT or finance. So this is not something that should be unusual, but it is something that ties up the productivity of the people. And the challenge is, how can you create the resources, the productivity improvements that enable you as a CHRO to actually have the time to become strategic and act strategically? Focus on cost reduction. So very often, how can we get the most best-in-class people for the lowest cost? And frankly, that is an attitude which, from an investment standpoint, may not make sense. Would you want to get the best stock at the lowest price? Of course. But can you? Many times, they're not willing to pay the price it takes to get the best return on investment. So there's a different philosophy from just cost reduction to making a wise business decision on the investment returns for the right person for the job. It's also focused on best traditional practices. In other words, what is the best practice? Well, you see at SHRM and maybe Harvard Business Review, these ideas that come up all the time. And you say, well, that's the best practice that we ought to incorporate in our organization. The reality is, a lot of what you find as a best practice may not be the best practice for your specific company, your specific business. Every industry is different. Every company within the industry is different in how they view what is best for them. They also have only so much money, so much time, and resource to focus on improving the business. So of all these best practices, some of them, quite frankly, are more like fads, and they have a negative ROI to the company from a CEO perspective. Here's an example. In the mid-'80s through the '90s, it was very fashionable because Harvard and others said it was the best practice is to outsource manufacturing to China. That sounded great. It saved the company money. It helped them to compete. But I was telling them back at that same time, do not outsource anything other than a commodity, because if there's intellectual property or unique manufacturing processes involved, there is no protection legally in China to protect your company, and they will steal it. Now, you may say, of course they wouldn't do that. The reality is not only did they do that, but today, you know, they're hacking into all of our systems, including the government, and trying to take as much IP as possible. That was not a best practice, but it was fashionable because companies were looking at the bottom line for this year. They're not looking strategically at a multiple-year horizon and seeing where these trends may actually lead to. Unintended consequences, which cost them a lot of money and global competitiveness. Reactive to changes. Most people are reactive to change. Change, by definition, is volatility. In the stock market, volatility equals risk. So, of course, people don't want to change. Emotionally, it's a challenge as well. But let me ask you this question. If you had a CEO that was resistant to change and their revenue stayed flat year after year, profitability stayed flat year after year, do you think the board would put up with that? Do you think the shareholders would put up with that? CEOs are constantly trying to figure out how to not only change to be more competitive, but change to the changing world around them. And all of us have seen the last 10 to 20 years, globalization, massive increase in competition, major technology changes, and the list goes on and on. If we're not open to change, the right kind of change to support the business, then the question is, what value are you adding to the business? In many cases, you're becoming more of an anchor. Large established companies who are not willing to change are often seeing themselves basically go out of business. And the forecast is that a lot of Fortune 500s in the next 10 to 20 years will no longer even be around. And the reason is, whether it's the internet or other ways of doing business, they're not willing to modify and adjust strategically to get there. And that includes every function being willing to do the same thing. And last is the hard to measure the impact on the company and the impact of what HR is doing for revenue, profit, and competitiveness. And that's because a lot of the measurements that you have are more what I call gooey. From a financial standpoint, they're looking for auditability and reliability. So some of the words and even terms HR uses, they're good, the concepts are good, but from a statistical standpoint, there's a lot of lack of clarity and predictability specifically to tie to metrics. So from a CEO standpoint, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. And therefore the value, the perceived value, is less. So let me ask you a few questions. Is your HR organization demonstrating auditable, measurable results? If so, how are you communicating those? In HR language or in the language of the CEO? And usually, when it's a metric, the CFO is the one who's the official scorekeeper. So are they looking at and validating that these are auditable, legitimate numbers? Let me give you an example. In procurement, supply management, they would talk about how much money they save. This is awesome. We save all this much money. They sometimes call it a competitive advantage. Or they would look at it as slowing down the increase in the spend. And they would call that savings. But from a financial standpoint, and I created Global Procurement for Unisys Corporation, I had to change all the definitions so that anything that was a auditable, true P&L benefit to the company, true profit, is all that we would measure. Anything other than that would just be an attaboy. But most of the time, procurement didn't understand how finance measured things, and so they would make statements that were totally bogus in the mind of the CEO. Here's an example. I saved $100 million in lowering the cost of IT spend. When you analyze the IT spend, every year it goes down. More feature functions, lower cost. Procurement had nothing to do with that particular change in the direction of the pricing of IT equipment. So that is a invalid, non-believable claim, which means that everything they then say is questioned, and therefore they have a really hard time getting the visibility and the credit for good work that they do. Next is it tied to the company long-term strategic plan. So if you're not integrated into that strategic plan with your specific role in that plan, then you're just omitted. There's no reason for you to even be at the table. So the question is, how are you going to get there? And is it tied to the business, revenue, profit, and competitiveness objectives? You need to start to talk about how you're going to help impact those three areas. As I said before, every employee can do that. You just have to start thinking in those terms and asking yourself, how can we impact positively these three areas? Unless you're doing that, you're not getting what's called the mind share of the CEO. Mind share means they only can think of so many things at once. So why are they going to pause their focus on the business and the growth of the business to talk about something that is more tactical? They want to outsource that. They want to give that to someone else to take care of for them. The next thing is implementing cross-functional, measurable, strategic business initiatives. So the question is, one, is HR helping cross-functionally to have a consensus on what actions HR should be doing to help the business? You may be shocked if you were to go and ask other people about what types of help they need from you. You may feel like you're being dumped on. In reality, you need to write those down because that is their perception. And their perception to them is reality. And if they're on the management committee, then all of a sudden, you're not meeting your client's needs. So the question is, how can you look at all those demands, filter out a synthesis of what you need to help the business to grow, sit down with them and prioritize and develop a strategy for how you can start to move the bar in the right direction. The fact you listen to them is the plus. The fact you're interacting with them and they're helping you prioritize helps you be ready to present this to the CEO with their concurrence, in which case the chances of you getting that level of attention and visibility is very high. Now, what do most CEOs view as traditional HR? First, keep me out of jail. Now, some of you, unfortunately, have CEOs that are doing some activities that, let's just say, are questionable, and you may actually be trying to help them. I had one client where, believe it or not, the CEO was a convicted felon, and the only reason he wasn't in jail was he's waiting for his sentencing. But in the meantime, he's still a CEO of this company. It's a fairly good-sized company. That's a nightmare. How do you handle that? In this case, I was working with the CFO through that process. Legally compliant. Help me to be compliant with regulations and the law. Keep me out of lawsuits. Keep me safe from unionization. And then provide administrative support. So look at this as this is their emotional side, but also notice none of this is strategic. All this is reactive to the moment. It's tactical. So all this is true. You need to make sure that tactically all these things, as the CEO defines them, are tactics for you to do, but they miss the main point, which is how you're helping move the bar. So they're not part of the company's measurable strategic business initiatives for revenue, profit, and competitiveness. So let me shift the bar from traditional HR to what does strategic HR do? First, it recognizes that traditional HR, for the most part, and there are exceptions, is tactical. Again, I define tactical as focused on the current year. If you look at finance as an example, the controller shop, 100% tactical. A strategic CFO is different, but even a lot of CFOs are tactical. So again, this is not pointing fingers at any function. This is universally the case. So the first thing strategic HR does is to not try to optimize the tactical. Why? The tactical may be actually the wrong thing to do to help the company. The tactical may actually be a negative ROI in impacting the company. So instead of focusing there first, they do something else. They learn the company's business. Let me understand how the products, marketing, and sales works and how all this ties together. What are the initiatives? What is the strategic plan of the company? What are the pains and the wants of the leadership? They then work with the C-suite and ultimately the CEO to design what I call the people strategy and the metrics that are validated, hopefully by finance as well, that support the business and then are presented, approved, and you now have the authority to follow and implement what everyone has said is now a strategic initiative. Now you're getting the visibility that, frankly, you deserve. And then what they do is they create new paradigms to maximize alignment, engagement, and motivation of every employee in support of the business ROI and the business initiatives. But notice, many times HR will say, I am optimizing my function. An example from a very high-level person, HR over 20-plus thousand people, said, Jim, I just created a shared service center, and I saved $12 million for my company. He looked and gave me some information, so I was able to look between the covers and see what he did. He did a great job politically. This is a company that didn't like change. But I asked him the question. I said, you realize that shared service centers were a concept that finance started in the 80s and propelled them even more in the 90s? This is not a true strategic change. It helps lower costs. It does have longer-term impacts. But how is that helping the revenue of the company, the profitability of the company? Because you may actually be doing something and moving people around that's going to cost you more in the long run. Here's an example of that. A major consultant came into a very large Atlanta company and suggested in procurement to consolidate all of procurement into corporate. And the company did that. They got rid of all the people out in the field. In doing that, the company saved a lot of money. The consultant got paid a lot of money, and the consultant walked away very happy. The problem was the people that they got rid of were the ones who understood how the machines worked, understood all the different nuances of the detail of what they had to buy. The company came almost to a stop, and they had to go right back out and rehire those people because the people at corporate didn't have a clue about the technical requirements of the business. You have to look at things from a totality of the business. Is it positive or negative? In the case of shared service centers, it can be good, but you also can make mistakes in moving out people who are really helping the field and valued by the field, and therefore actually creating a negative situation that could frankly cost a lot more than $12 million. And as each of you know, a few lawsuits or class action lawsuits would diminish that $12 million into actually a negative number. They then oversee tactical HR to implement the unique business initiatives throughout the HR process. In other words, when corporate defines what the objective is and the strategies, HR then needs to say, how am I going to implement this? How is that going to impact every single one of my processes? So I need to tweak them, not eliminate good things, but to tweak them to support the business and also employee development while ensuring legal compliance. So How can a traditional HR department add the strategic dimension? The first thing you have to do is look at your resources. The chances are no one's going to give you a blank check with more resources to do this. What they are going to say is create the resources yourself. And there are ways of doing that. But what you have to do is start thinking the concept of how can I as a CHRO help to delegate the key reports, allow the day-to-day fires, have a delegation of authority so that if it's really big, they come to me. But that creates time that I can start thinking about the strategic. I can go sit down with each of the other C-suite members and have these conversations and continue that dialogue so I'm really part of that team. They then, when they start seeing that we're responding to their needs and wants, will be very supportive of us becoming part of that strategic table. So how can it do it? You identify what are the strategic gaps that the C-suite believes are existing. You then sit down with the CEO and ask that person what they see as the strategic gaps. You may be shocked to realize that their view of strategic gaps is different from the rest of the C-suite. You have to start with the CEO's perspective, and usually the other C-suite will be more functionally reactive, tactical in their focus. You still need to know their issues, but the CEO is going to be looking at bigger issues and simple concepts. They're not going to flesh out the details. They'll give you the idea and the vision, allowing you then to come back with your recommendation, your strategy to address those gaps. So how do you do that? This is a major challenge, and it's one that most CHROs today are not pursuing. Why do I say that? Because I talk to a lot of CEOs. In other words, I'm not talking to as many CHROs. I'm talking to the CEOs, and they're the ones giving me this feedback. Remember, perception in their minds is reality. So the question is, how do you close that gap as well so that your perception of what you're doing is matching or exceeding the expectations of the CEO? How you do it is you adapt new paradigms, processes, and metrics that are approved by the CEOs and boards. In other words, you develop a listing of all these gaps. It will take 2 to 3 or more years to address them all. You can't do all things at once. It will cause disruption in the company. And what you want to do is identify which one has the biggest impact to the company today. And that's where you start. Now, you also want to start by helping the company define what they believe they really need to run the company. And as you tick through each one, you may say, this is the highest priority. CEO, do you agree? Here's how we're going to roll it out, how I'm going to use the resources. Maybe you do need an additional budget other than the traditional budget you have. Maybe we need some more capital. Whatever the answer is, this is where you get it approved, because it's the CEO is the one who decides ultimately what's going to be spent and where. If the ROI of your program makes sense and helps them grow revenue, profit, and competitiveness, you'll get the funding. And you have to do that while still being taken care of the risk issues. So you start with a very challenging question, and it's one that most people aren't willing to ask themselves. They want to go on with business as usual, and when the CEO says, I need A, they go figure out how to run and get A. Instead of helping the CEO realize what the CEO really needs and strategically have that level of discussion with them. Reactive versus proactive. Proactively, you have to ask the question, how can we revolutionize the company, revenue, profit, and competitiveness? And when I say we, this is the CHRO and the HR function. How can you help revolutionize the company? I'm going to suggest to you that HR has the biggest opportunity in business today. Why? In my view, it's the most neglected area of developing strategic business initiatives, and therefore, because of that, the impact to the company is amazing. It's huge. And the opportunity for you to show success in leadership is on the table. All you have to do is be willing to pick it up and run with it. Here's some examples. 60% of company failures are due to people problems. This is from the VC industry. 100% of companies have people problems. This hasn't changed in years. So what is HR doing to help this change? Well, HR can't do it by themselves, but they can take the lead to help make suggestions and help look at this area and to put together plans to be approved. Cost of a bad hire, 1 to 10 times total compensation. These are statistics from reality. One CEO told me, he said, Jim, this last person cost me 70 times their compensation. Now notice the difference. A statistical analysis of the average versus a CEO's first in their mind, emotional reaction. You think that might get their attention to be willing to help address the problem? How are you going to address that problem? Is it just HR? Of course not. But who's going to take the lead across the company? There is nobody else. It's an opportunity. Less than 1/3 of the workforce is engaged. 20% are silently hostile. That impacts the business. Lost business revenue, millions of dollars in liability, cost, lack of competitiveness. You see how this clearly impacts the business. Look at risk and cost. If you're not addressing risk properly or cost properly, you're going to have a negative ROI, momentum, and time. Cost of penny wise, pound foolish. Penny wise means penny wise in your function. It's true of any function. IT, they may spend millions of dollars on a wonderful widget that no one really needs. So it's not just HR. But you look at sometimes you're actually creating a negative HR to the company. You're harming the company because you're not integrated into the big picture of what's needed to drive the business. Here are some charts I'm sure you've seen before. The one on the left simply shows by salary, bad hires. The one on the right is simply showing Gallup studies. Let me talk about Gallup very quickly. It's not just Gallup, but any statistical study. If it doesn't have the ability to catch cheaters, those who want to defraud the system, game the system, then the results of that survey or study, to be honest with you, are not credible. Why are these credible? Because this is a silent, nationwide, and global study where individual company managers don't feel threatened. But to my knowledge, I have yet to see a workplace survey on engagement that actually has the ability to catch those people who are gaming the system. And so if I'm the manager and I have my own agenda, I'm going to tell my people, answer it this way. Or if I'm an employee, I don't want heat from above coming down on me, I'm a happy camper. Even though I may not believe what I'm putting down, I'll put down that everything is okay. And then, amazingly, the honest people may be honest, and they may get the grief from the top because the report now says that these guys are wonderful who are cheating, and over here the honest people are saying that everything's not wonderful. What's wrong with those people? The results very often are the national survey have these statistics, but specific company surveys usually show engagement far higher, and that's misleading the company. So all I'm saying is be cautious about how you use these numbers. The big picture numbers, pretty validated. Company specific, be very, very careful. But notice these are trends. We have generational trends, which means that the engagement issue everyone's focused on is not only valid, but as you move toward millennials and the next generation, the trend is clear. The problem is getting worse, which means what are we going to do about it? How is HR going to lead that parade? And then how are these impacting your company's revenue, profit, and competitiveness? You can easily see from the picture on the right that if you can move the bar and have more people engaged, that has a direct correlation to the success of the business. The flip side is, on the bottom side, on the right-hand side, those actively disengaged, how are you addressing that to dramatically reduce the number of people there? And don't think that there's just people who are disgruntled with the company. That's a traditional reaction I get. In this number includes those who are extremely bright and aggressive but are frustrated with the management and the glass ceilings above them. And so with their extra creativity and innovation and mindset, they're actually doing other things that are harmful to the business. You also have in here those who are self-focused, whether they're political people or those who are trying to figure out how they can do something and grow their business. Or, as one person in the company, he would go to the library and start studying real estate on company time to figure out how we can make money on the side because he wasn't happy with his progression in the company. This is an area that needs to be addressed because not only is it a not contributor to the ROI of the company, it is a negative ROI, harms the brand, harms teamwork, and is something that needs to be very much in the foremind of people. But what else is being impacted? Good question. Here are the top CEO concerns as I talk to CEOs. Number one is risk. High growth equals high risk of employee and operational failure. Well, notice, the employees drive the operations. So high growth means a lot's going on, people are losing control. If you don't have a strategic foundation laid, what happens is you will find yourself being reactive, and there's a huge risk of the company not being successful. CEO has distractions from their primary focus on growing the business. How are they actually focusing on the business when there are people issues, some of which they're not even telling you? They keep it to themselves. Why? It's an emotional issue that they may be grappling with. One CEO told me and other advisors that he was spending a third of his time on this specific problem. Now, we told him what to do about it, but it still took him a year to get around to addressing the issue, after which it was like a huge burden off his shoulders. How are you asking the CEO questions, open-ended questions, so that he or she are actually sharing things with you and you can add value, how you can help them address those problems in a humane way? Wasted investments and lost time. CEOs are very frustrated with throwing money out the door with training that doesn't work. Or they have a sales organization that is a revolving door. And so why am I training these people if the turnover is 50+%? Or, if you remember in the past, they used to spend millions and billions of dollars on technology, wondering where's the return on my investment. We're starting to see that now in technology, but it took a long time. So the emotion of throwing money, good money after bad money, is something that on the investment side you can help with to make sure that they see the value, the ROI of what they're investing in. And then lost time. How many of the employees may be all about themselves, and not only are they impacting their productivity, but those around them in the team? Or worse, those cross-functionally where maybe the bonuses are actually competing with each other, and I make my bonus at the sacrifice of taking advantage of the forecast and objectives of the guy in the department next to me. It happens in every big company that I know of. Lost opportunity. How many times am I losing opportunities for new business, new innovation, new progress because I have a chaos in the organization? Everyone is not really on the same page and aligned. So we talk about alignment. Yeah, everyone agrees with alignment is important. But how am I in HR helping to cross that goal to get alignment? I know it's not just HR, but HR can take a major role in that. And the same thing is true with momentum. Is the company self-focused as opposed to external client-focused? You can see how that impacts momentum and success of the company. And finally, and the most important, is how is it impacting my brand in the company? If you looked at Target this past year, you saw they had a major fraud situation within the last 18 months where hackers came in and stole a lot of identity information, cost them billions of dollars, lost business, including mine, because I did not want to go back with a credit card. It also cost, I believe, the CEO certainly embarrassment, if not his job. British Petroleum, they had a major oil spill, cost $20+ billion, and the CEO's job. What caused it? People weren't aligned and following the process. It a people issue. So if traditional thinking is not working, even though it's not within the HR function, you're serving these other functions. How are you helping them to understand better ways of doing things? I call it paradigm shift strategic thinking. Here are some examples of what I'm talking about. This is just one of many, but it's a major one I like to challenge your thinking with. Most people talk about human resources or perhaps human capital. Finance talks about expenses, headcount, expenses have feet. And when you look at defining these, you find that every one, resources, capital, expenses, headcount, are commodities. They're disposable, expendable, fungible commodities. If you hold in your hand a bunch of sand, you look at the sand, there's one grain, it's basically the same value as the grain next to it. Whether it's sugar, whether it's corn, these are called commodities. And yet that's why many employees feel like they're just a number. And many decisions are made, whether it's salaries, whether it's bonuses, made on all the wrong reasons because you don't have the metrics in place, or you're viewing people not as other than a number, and because of that, if you lay off 14,000 people, well, they're all the same. It doesn't matter which 14,000 we selected. And if you haven't been through major layoffs, then you may not have seen what I just said, but when I worked at Unisys, we went from 120,000 to 30-some-odd thousand people. Part of that was selling of assets, other was layoffs right and left. And if you were in the wrong place at the wrong time, it didn't matter. They used a broadsword. They didn't use a scalpel and figure out who to let go. That had huge negative impacts to the company. But if you're looking at that and say, well, what are people instead of commodities? If you're paying them salary and benefits every month, are they an expense or an investment? And if an investment, what is the ROI and increasing value of your investments? This is a major paradigm shift in thinking. And if an investment, how are you helping them produce a measurable ROI and increasing in value? And finally, how are you looking at employees who, if you're investing money in them, how are they producing not only the return on investment and value, but they are accountable and responsible for the results of their own actions? We have today a battle between basically socialist thinking, everyone's entitled, versus profitable business thinking, or perhaps you might call it capitalism. And the question is the employee responsible for their own actions? I think the answer is obvious. It's yes. But if you look at which is the process and how they're being treated, very often there's a lack of focus and continuity in the processes, including performance management, to help them. But it's not just helping them be accountable, but to help them learn how they can be successful in their own career by aligning with the company. The problem is, unless the companies define how to do that, they can't. So CEOs, every CEO I've ever talked to, believes that employees are human investments. And if they are human investments, there are three levels of opportunities that I'm going to suggest that you can take to create measurable, strategic business initiatives to achieve revolutionary growth in revenue, profit, and competitiveness. The first is the board and CEO level. To define the people requirements needed to drive higher levels of profit, revenue, and competitiveness, and the business initiatives to make it happen. The word define here is critical. Most of the time, there is no definition policy on what people need to do to act, to behave, to fit the company's business objectives. We understand the tactical measurements, such as what are you doing in cost savings or impacting your particular job, but is there a single policy to help the whole company be aligned together? I call it a people investment policy. If you look at your own personal financial portfolio, think of this as a company's people portfolio. If you have a bad stock, misperforming bond, what are you going to do about it? How are you going to design this so that your diversification, your risk, your assumptions now become part of a policy? In a company, they do this for finance. When I was in corporate treasury, I had to invest $600 million, and Goldman Sachs worked with me for an exception to that policy, and it worked out really well. But that forces managers down the line to comply with the corporate policy. Any exception has to come back up for approval. Organizational level. Once these definitions are completed, how are you going to implement the definitions throughout the organization? And how is it going to impact every process that HR has? How are you going to modify traditional thinking processes? We're not talking about throwing out good processes. We're talking about how we're going to tweak them to add more value to the company. And how are you going to measure that? What are the metrics that you can put on a dashboard that has visibility every month to see the trends of how your strategic objectives are moving toward the goal that the CEO and board are monitoring? And finally, the employee level. How are you going to show employees how the new paradigms and processes can help them tie their success into company success and be accountable for their results? Well, the answer is you have to have these definitions implemented from top down, and then we recommend processes to show them how they can develop themselves as a product that the company believes has value, more hireable, more promotable, but they have to define themselves, find what are the gaps where they may think they're doing great, but management may not. So we have an advisory program how to solve that issue. We then look at how are they going to learn to communicate. They may be the best and brightest employee, but if no one knows it, they may get laid off or picked on by a politician. So how can they learn to communicate so that others know the contributions that they're making to the company? And then finally, how are they learning to develop relationships throughout the company, asking them how they can help them cross-functionally plus in their team so that you're creating a true team dynamic within the company, and the employee is enjoying learning how to do that and develop those relationships. Why is that critical? Developing relationships is how you develop trust. Trust is the oil to business. And most businesses, there's a huge lack of trust and suspicion and fear that actually is drying up the moving parts of most businesses. So if you're doing these three things, developing the definitions, implementing them through the organization, working with the P&L management, and helping the employees learn how they can personally be motivated to be successful, to align with what's now defined, to engage in how they can contribute ROI and value to the business. This is what Pat talks about. If you get all the people in an organization rowing the same direction, you can dominate any industry, any market, against any competition at any time. And the choice ultimately is up to you and HR to help take the lead. It won't happen by itself. We believe that this is the better way to row. As I said before, this ultimately is the greatest opportunity to help businesses move the needle to become more competitive, increase the revenue, the profitability, in which you and HR will start to get far more recognition and part of the strategic table where you belong. You have to earn it. So feel free to let me know if you have any questions, and here's contact information if you'd like to reach out to me. So let me ask you, are there any questions you'd like me to answer? Okay, I don't hear, Perry, any questions. So
I don't either. Does anybody have anything they want to ask? Feel free to do so if you want to, and just turn off your mute. This is all the time we'll have for questions. So
feel free
go
to
ahead and ask.
All right, I want to thank everybody for their time. Hopefully this was a benefit to you. Hopefully there's at least one idea that I share that may help you become more successful in what you're doing. Thank you.
Definitely.
And have a wonderful day.
Thank you so much, Jim. Thank you so much. We appreciate it. And if you haven't already done so, go ahead and fill out that Google Doc that's on the chat box. And we will be posting this webinar on the TAG website under training. So be on the lookout for it there. And Jim, thanks again so much. We really appreciate you taking your time today to talk to us.
Thank you.
All right, everyone have a great weekend.